All right, so this is chapter 8 on memory. All right, so first off, I would like for you all to be familiar with how memory is defined, as you see it listed here above. All right, with the persistence of learning over time through encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. We are going to cover the information processing model, which is the encoding, storage, and retrieval a few slides ahead. We will also go over the three measures of memory retention, which is recalling, recognizing, and relearning. All right, as soon as the slides want to work. So here we have a video. I won't play it right now, but it's a video just showing how our memory is not as great as we think it is and how we can start implanting things in our memory that aren't even there. So please feel free to watch the video on your own time. All right, so here we have the three measures of memory retention. Recall, the measure of memory in which a person must retrieve information learned earlier. The best example for this, as listed, is the fill-in-the-blank test. Now, with recall, you may have some context clues within the question that will guide your memory, but yet the answer is not there. So recall is having to really know that information, really showing that you've retained that memory so that you can recall it when you don't see it as an option listed. The next measure of memory retention is going to be recognition. Think of the term as the base word recognizing. You'll know it once you see it there visible to you. This is the measure of memory in which a person identifies items previously learned, which in a great example, since we're using test, would be a multiple choice test. Well, with the multiple choice test, the answer is there. You just have to choose the best choice, but you're able to recognize it from seeing it previously. Then lastly, we have relearning. This is the measure of memory, just like the term. You're relearning the information over and over and over again, typically through the process of rehearsal, so that when you study it the next time, you don't have to study as long. For example, let's say you start with chapter 8 material. Okay, you'll probably have to study, let's say, for an hour over and over and over again, the information about chapter 8. If you study it tomorrow, it shouldn't take you as long as an hour because some of that information, some of those memories should be retained. So the more you study each day, the less you have to study because of your ability to retain that information. So that is why it's saying the amount of time saved once you do it through rehearsal over and over and over again. All right, so here we have the information processing model. Very important. So the three processes is encoding, storage, and retrieval. So I always give students the example of a desktop computer. All right, think of the encoding as the keyboard, the storage as the storage tower or the hard drive, and then the retrieval as the monitor. Encoding is how we get the information entered in. Okay, it's the process of processing information in the memory system, getting the info in our memory bank. All right, storage is how we go back and, or not go back, but storage is how we keep, bank, retain the memory or the information that we've learned. And then retrieval is how we go back and pull that information out of storage when we need to use it. So I tell students encoding is like the keyboard. That's how you get the information into the computer. Once you get the information into the computer, you type it in with the keyboard and you want to be able to go back and get that at some point, you have to save it. When you save it, it goes into the storage. And then when you need it again, you go back and retrieve it off of the hard drive or from the storage. But where is it displayed to you? On the monitor. So I always give that example as a desktop computer. All right, so that is it for the information processing model. All right, next up we have the three processing stages of memory models. So we have sensory, short-term, and long-term. Sensory is very, very brief. I want you to think of sensory as snapshots that snapshots of memory that we retain throughout the day. Sensory memory, we're getting sensory information all the time through information that we hear or through gathering information through things that we see. So let's say you got out of the car, all right, and you were headed to class, and you may have seen 5 different people, but you were rushing into class, okay? That may not be that common because it could be a lot of students gathering to class typically around the same time. Well, if I asked you, okay, for $1 million, could you tell me what all 5 of those students had on when you were walking into the building? Most likely you wouldn't be able to get that $1 million unless you just have an impeccable memory, because that was just too much information. You picked up sensory information from getting out of the car, seeing the 5 people. Okay, you got in the building, you walked past maybe 15 or 20 people. You got into class, and then you saw 10 or 15 other people. It's snapshots, so much information. So with it being so much information that we're picking up through our senses, they fade away unless they're significant, okay? If they are significant enough, they will then carry on into the short-term memory. Short-term memory is also called working memory, okay? With short-term memory, we typically have it through rehearsal. So I always give the example with short-term memory is students that cram for a test, okay? So let's say a student was cramming for a test the night before, and the student takes the exam the next day and they do decent. Let's say they get a 75, let's say they get an 80. If I was to test that student 2 days later or even a day later, the student most likely will do worse because they really only held it for a short amount of time for the sole purpose of using it on the exam. They didn't study it enough and get that information encoded in properly in order to have it and go to long term, so that no matter how many times they were tested, they would know the information regardless, okay? Short-term memory, if it is significant enough in the short-term memory and we go over it and over it and over it, or go through it each and every day or for a very long period of time, it will go to the long-term memory, which has a limitless storehouse of memories, okay? So it's limitless storehouse, and long-term memory is there forever, okay? So be familiar with the memory models. All right, here's another video that you all can watch. It just gives you an example of how our memory works. All right, so next up, I want to discuss explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memory takes effort, okay? So these are the types of memories that we've gained through facts and experiences, which we can consciously know and declare, and we can pull it up just like that, okay? So examples of explicit memory would be like information you learned in school, okay? The first president of the United States, order of operations, how your alphabets, okay, how to multiply, how to divide, how do you perform the task of addition, things of that nature, okay? That would be in our explicit memory. It comes to us just like that. Implicit memory, okay, is a automatic processing, which could also be considered or fall in the category as like classical conditioning. The things that will come to us automatically once we've learned it, and we'll have it forever and ever and ever, but typically that's some form of a skill. So retention of learned skills or classically conditioned associations, independent of conscious recollection, okay? Automatic processing without awareness. So examples for this would be, okay, you were taught to ride a bike. Let's say you learned how to ride a bike when you were 5 or 6 years old, okay? You may not have ridden on a bike in 20 years, okay? Do you need a whole lesson over riding a bike again? No, you know how to ride a bike, okay? Same thing with driving a car. You may not have driven in a number of years, but once you learned it, you kind of can't unlearn it. That would be an example of implicit memory, or people's ability to type without even having to look at the keys. Implicit memory, automatic processing, you get it very, very quickly, okay? So implicit and explicit. All right, we talked about sensory memory, and let's focus on the two types, which are iconic and echoic. Iconic is very simple. What you see is a visual memory, an icon, and echoic is a auditory memory, sound memory of something that we heard. So those are the two types of sensory memory. All right, you could just read over this about our short-term memory capacity. A big catalyst with memory, short-term memory, sensory memory, is the significance, how important that memory is if in order for it to finish and kind of ultimately go to the long-term storage so that we have it forever and ever. All right, here are some memory techniques that you'll need to be familiar with. We have chunking, mnemonics, and hierarchies. So chunking is when we take a large amount of information and then we condense it to areas or sections or units that we can manage in order to retain it. When we see a lot of information, that can be extremely overwhelming for us to retain one time, okay, or over the course of time. So we do something automatic without even trying, which is chunking. So typically with our social security number, we don't remember each number individually. We group the numbers with the first three, middle two, last four. We do the same thing with phone numbers. First three, second three, last four. Okay, we chunk those things so that they're more manageable for us, so that it comes to us more quickly and automatically. Okay, mnemonics are the memory aids. So one mnemonic that I always give examples for is "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." And that is a mnemonic for the order of operations. Okay, a lot of information of what steps, okay, should a student perform first in the order of operations. But if you remember the mnemonic, you can pull that information out of your conscious memory just like that and complete your order of operations. So it just makes your life so much easier when you can group these things into where you can manage it into your memory bank. All right, and lastly, we have hierarchies. Hierarchies we will typically see in science a lot because you can see it with the bones. We did it with the nervous system, how we broke down the nervous system into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, and how the peripheral nervous system was subdivided even lower into the somatic and autonomic nervous system, and then how it went into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So it takes a lot of information and it groups it and divides it so that we can have an easier process for retaining that particular memory. So be familiar with chunking, mnemonics, and hierarchies as techniques or strategies that help us retain memory of large amounts of information so that they are manageable. All right. Be sure to take a look at the Memory Champion video. These are some interesting videos that I found that give you insight to how our memory works. All right, I've already covered the long-term memory capacity. It is limitless and it is a permanent storehouse of our long-term memory. All right, continuing on, we have semantic and episodic memory. Okay, semantic memory, facts, general knowledge. Just like I told you before when we were talking about the explicit memory. Okay, episodic, think of it as an episode, an experienced event in your life. So an episodic memory could be your first day of college. Okay, first time you went to the hospital, your first date. Okay, a particular episode in your life. Okay, the hippocampus we talked about hippocampus when we were going over the brain in chapter 2. And so when we were going over chapter 2, it kind of let you all know that it is a building foundation when we learned about that, because it can feel like, why in the world would I need to know about the brain and I'm taking a psychology class? Well, it's all interconnected, okay? So the hippocampus is located near the limbic system. And what it's responsible for, and why you see it here, is that it is responsible for holding on into the explicit memory before moving them to long-term storage. So that's how chapter 2 connects with chapter 8. All right, cerebellum. Okay, we talked about cerebellum in chapter 2 as well. We focused on cerebellum in chapter 2 more so. We kind of got really heavy on movement, how it affects movement of our body parts, but it also plays an important role in forming and storing the implicit memories, such as riding the bike, ability to type without seeing the keys on the keyboard, your ability to drive a car even if you haven't driven a car in 30 years, 40 years, things like that. So that's the importance of its role in our brain and how it connects with chapter 8. All right, so flashbulb memories. When students think of flashbulb memories, they can get confused easily or wonder, why does it sound very similar to episodic memories? Well, the biggest difference between episodic memory and flashbulb memories is an emotional connection. So flashbulb memories are very, very vivid, okay? Episodic memories are pretty vague because you're remembering the event, not all of the aspects of the event. You're not remembering how you felt and things like that. You just remember the event itself. With flashbulb memories, it's so vivid to you, it's like it just happened, and it holds some type of emotional significance. So you can, some things that may fall into that category could be maybe how someone experienced learning of a death, where they were, how they felt. And it can bring on real emotion even when they're thinking about or reliving that memory. The attacks of 9/11. A lot of times people remember exactly where they were and exactly how they felt, okay? And certain other things can fall into that category. But the biggest association with flashbulb memories, or the biggest difference with flashbulb memories versus episodic memories, is that the flashbulb memories is very, very vivid, and that it is tied to an emotion that we experienced during that particular memory. All right, it's just showing you here the locations and area of the brain and the functions, how it relates to memory. All right, here's a hierarchy, okay? We just talked about hierarchies, but this gives a really great breakdown of what falls into the implicit memory category, explicit memory category, the different association areas of the brain, and what memories fall under implicit and what memories fall under explicit memories. All right, you can just read over that. That's just FYI, but it is very interesting how we can have brain damage that can cause the anterograde amnesia and retrograde amnesia. All right, and we'll talk about encoding failure on the second half of the audio lecture. This concludes the first half.